today. It's going to be extraordinary because we managed to compile the outcomes of all 4 sessions. And we will have the rapporteurs presentation that will go through all the sessions, summarizing what issues were brought up and what were the solutions. For some cases short-term and for some cases long-term that can be included or further explored. And after that, we have excellent 3 speakers that will be invited to comment on those outcomes. Please also feel free to comment in the platform. I think we also share with you all the links to the Padlets and YouTube streaming. If you have the solution that you would really want to share with us, it is still possible till the end of today, because we will be collecting all the voices for our general report of the conference outcomes. After this reporting plenary, with the commentary session, we will have general statement from Colm that is summarizing the whole conference, and then we will invite you to the closing plenary from the organizations we are working with, and Ambassador Léon FABER, Deputy Executive Director of the Asia Europe Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I would like to now pass the floor to Luca, who will be reporting, starting with stream 1 that was dedicated to agriculture.
Thank you, Gina. For the stream 1 on agriculture, we got into a very interesting discussion, which touched on many issues, but mostly on 2 topics. Next slide, please. So these were the importance of regenerative agriculture for implementing circular economy principles and contributing to circular economy goals when it comes to agriculture and food. And then we discussed AMR, antimicrobial resistance, which has been called climate change of health. So that's also another very important issue, which also reminded us really of the systemic nature of the impacts of our activities. So to sum up a little bit, the 3 main points that came out of this discussion: we need to mainstream regenerative agriculture and agroecology. This should become the norm or the normal, instead of being just a niche approach to agriculture. As toward these techniques, we can really have sustainable food systems where we preserve soil fertility and other resources that are essential for production to continue in the long term on agricultural land. We also need to integrate these principles and techniques into climate strategies and policies. We are still treating sometimes different environmental issues in silos. So we have, for example, the COP on climate change, and then we have a separate COP on biodiversity. We really need to strive for a more transversal approach, more systemic approach when it comes to defining policies, as all of these issues, of course, are interconnected and influence one another. So they cannot be treated, cannot be solved in isolation. So this was another point that was touched in this session. And we extended that beyond policy as well, talking about how there is a need also for research and knowledge to be framed with this more kind of interdisciplinary or systemic or transdisciplinary approach in mind. When it comes to antimicrobial resistance, we discussed some of the impacts of it, which are pretty serious, and especially when we look at impacts in the future in terms of loss of human lives and also economic costs. And one of the recommendations that we gave from this session was really to maintain what is called a One Health approach. So where the health of people and its interconnection with the health of the environment, so of land and water systems, is really seen as highly interconnected. So we cannot have healthy people without healthy ecosystems. Next slide, please. We've discussed many solutions, so it was a bit difficult for me to sum them up, and I didn't want to present all of them. So here are just some of the ones that were considered as more important and discussed a bit more in details. When it comes to short term, it was discussed the need to adjust subsidies to agriculture on the basis of how different agricultural practices contribute to climate change or climate mitigation, and also to the provision of ecosystem services. So we really need for agriculture not just to serve the purpose of feeding the planet, but also to provide other contributions, including, of course, greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration, and the provision of other ecosystem services, including the ones provided by biodiversity. So in this vein, regenerative agriculture, of course, is very important. It allows us to not just produce food, but also provide other benefits. Another solution was to create a commission or a working group to design specific national policies on antibiotic stewardship and addressing antimicrobial resistance. So we really need to mainstream into policy this issue because it's very relevant and is not treated with the right level of urgency and importance at the moment. When it comes then to long-term solutions, we talked about creating evidence on performance of different agricultural systems, and not just that, but also then to find ways to use that knowledge to drive policymaking support. So here is about not just producing knowledge about what these systems do in terms of benefits and in terms of their effectiveness in producing food, but also, then being able to translate this knowledge in a way and in a form that is useful for policymakers then to regulate and make decisions based on this. So this is also very important. Another long-term solution was to review and reform regulations around antimicrobial resistance with an equity lens. So really looking at there are different needs when it comes to antibiotic use in different parts of the world. So we need to regulate and essentially reduce the use of antibiotics, but we need to adopt a flexible and adaptable approach when we do that, that takes into account the different needs of different stakeholders in different parts of the world. And this is all to sum up the agriculture session. So now I leave the floor to Dóra, and I'll come back later for the international food trade. Please, Dóra.
Thank you, Luca. So yesterday we had a session that was focusing on the role of small and medium-sized enterprises in creating circular food systems. Next slide, please. We had a very lively discussion on how we can understand food policies' role in creating, in supporting SMEs in creating circular food systems. We discussed specifically the role of how bioeconomic approaches can underpin circular food systems and how food waste can be integrated in these circular approaches to food systems. We also had two great innovation examples of supporting SMEs in this quest. Then we moved on identifying problems and finding solutions for the identified problems regarding how the SME sector can be supported to adopt and upscale practices for circular food systems. Prior to the session, participants submitted a lot of important considerations for this problem. So we grouped these into four main categories, and we tried to find solutions for these. The first was to find policies to support circular approaches, to develop policies to support circular approaches that are coherent and comprehensive. Then to focus on financing. The third was awareness raising among businesses and consumers, but as well as get political commitment. And then the fourth was about product design and sustainable business model and supply chains. Next slide, please. So during the session, we had time to focus and find solutions for the first 3 topics. So I would like to now present you some of the solutions that our participants and speakers, panelists together identified and outlined as the most important ones. So in order to develop coherent and comprehensive policies for supporting SMEs to adopt and upscale circular food systems practices, it is important that SMEs are brought into the policy-making processes. They get a place at the table where policies are made, so their voices are heard. It is also important to promote the uptake of circular approaches via procurement. And there was an agreement that governments need to take a leading role in supporting green, sustainable, circular, and inclusive procurement approaches. It is also important to make sure that policies don't have contradictions among them. So there is a need to work out the sufficient level of details of implementation in these policies and make sure that policies that are referring to the food sector and that are considering the involvement of SMEs in circular food systems are actually moving towards the same direction and are coherent. Lastly, it was outlined that there is a need to support SMEs with practical models for standardization. This means that for example, to ensure food safety, there is a need to provide SMEs with hands-on approaches so that they don't have to try to compete with, for example, large producers who have more resources to ensure food safety. Next slide, please. The second aspect where we focused on finding solutions was financing. And we have agreed that there is a lack of financial incentives that are specifically designed for SMEs, and especially in Asia, and there is a need to work on this approach on this. And it's not only to create these financial incentives or schemes for SMEs, but it is also important to make the access to these easier, meaning that there is a need for easy access, but there is also a need for standardized accounting solutions. Then there was issue raised about subsidies and how they should be designed efficiently, and only the subsidies, when they are designed, they need to consider circular food production and food system approaches. They need to make sure that they are promoting sustainable approaches. Lastly, the role of international collaborations and cooperations for funding was outlined in this regard. Last slide, please, on this topic. Thank you. So we discussed awareness raising, and we were mostly focusing on the role of consumers. There was a point raised during the session which argued that the consumer demand for circularity can drive policy change. So therefore, it is very important to increase consumer acceptance and awareness about circular and bioeconomy approaches. And there was also agreement that there are already conscious consumers, so there is a need to innovate ways for linking producers with consumers who already want to have sustainability approaches on their table. And then lastly, there is an important consideration to promote standards for circular food production, and also to establish cooperation with big producers and who can also involve SMEs in the supply chains in this way. So this was about the session yesterday, and now I will move on to reporting about the session today, which was about food policies and food security. So the next slide, please. And then the next slide. So at the food policy and food security discussion, we focused on the role of food policies in creating inclusive access to food, equitable and inclusive access to food. We also focused on finding and understanding the role of innovation in bringing climate resilient and climate focused solution for food policies. We also discussed the role of financing, and as well as just a second, we also discussed the policy transformation that is needed for the functionality and the resilience of the food system. And lastly, how we can work with multi-stakeholders partnerships as a pathway to more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable food systems. So in terms of the problems that we have identified with the help of our participants prior to the session, we realized that we need food policies that secure sufficient access to food for all, that promote sustainable agricultural production practices, that support sufficient access to finance, technology, capacity building, but also human resources, as well as that support access to markets, ensure green procurement, or create circular supply chains. And lastly, there was a fifth issue, which was focusing on food standards and food production standards. So during the session, next slide, please, we covered the first 4 topics and we identified solutions for this. So now I will be similar to the previous session. I will be outlining the solutions that we have found in this area. Regarding policies that can address food security, it is very important, and the panelists outlined that there is a need to create food systems that are based on human rights. And for this, there is an important consideration to identify local innovations, local solutions that not only enable sustainability, but also inclusivity. For this, there is a need to better understand what is the local situation, the local context, to collect data which can support an informed and evidence-based policymaking. Lastly, there is a need for strategic and well-planned interventions that are targeting the most vulnerable. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next one was about policies that support the creation of policies that support sustainable agriculture practices. Here we have panelists who outlined that there is a need to focus on inclusivity instead of just increasing food production, because this is not the solution. And for this, we need to promote regenerative agriculture practices, but we not only need to promote these practices, we also need to make sure that these farming practices are profitable compared to the conventional ones. This lead to also a point where we said that there is a need to balance the policies which are now rather biased towards large producers, and there is a need to involve small farm holders throughout the value chain, the food value chain. Again, the importance of monitoring and data came up. Assessment frameworks are needed to measure sustainability and inclusivity, and already here the importance of strengthening consumers' knowledge and awareness on the issue so that we create market for these products were raised. Next slide, please. Okay, and the third problem is that we identified is related to promoting circular supply chains, green procurement, and access to markets. So we said that again we need to focus on local innovation and support these in different contexts, and different players in the field should be better understand. There is a need to create partnerships with rural finance organizations to enhance access to finance for the poor and the vulnerable. And there is a need to promote technology here with the involvement of governance, businesses, and research organizations. Okay, the last slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so here what we have found is that it's also important to strengthen and support local supply chains and create and support innovation, and also to establish this direct link between small producers and retailers, promote green procurement practices, and lastly, to build public awareness and circular economy. So as you have seen, while we discussed different solutions for the policy topic, we have found that there were issues that were raised across the different topics, and these were supporting local innovations, creating consumer awareness, supporting vulnerable groups and marginalized groups for inclusivity, and also to connect the small-scale farm holders directly with retailers and consumers. So I will now give back to the floor to Luca to cover the last session.
Thank you, Dóra. Last session was on international food trade. It was also a very interesting session. Of course, it is very challenging to combine and discuss the interconnections between what is basically a global food system with global trade and the goals of a circular economy, which include localized production and consumption, reducing imports, and other elements that are, of course, in contrast, so that can generate tensions with the global market. And this complicated even further by the context of climate change and the uncertainty that comes with it, in particular regarding changes in yield expected in the future that would affect, of course, changes in food prices, and that are calling for a more adaptable international food trade system, also when it comes to trade risk assessment. If you can go to the next slide, please. So as I did for agriculture, here I am very shortly summing up 3 main points that were discussed. The first is that we need to harmonize food standards and consolidate approaches to trade risk assessment. Trade risk assessment would have to include climate change models and predictions of yield production changes in order for it to be adaptable to changes in food prices that will result from that, and also changes in the needs of the different players and different countries in the market. We need to implement circular economy goals into food system and multinational corporation practices. This is, of course, very challenging. We started from recognizing that the actual global food market is not working properly, as it is not addressing, at least effectively, the distribution and allocation of food resources, as we still have a lot of people not having access to food, while we have, on the other hand, big amounts of food wasted and lost toward the supply chain. So the market currently is not working properly for what is the purpose it should be serving. We need to redefine that also with the principles of circular economy. So also reuse and reallocate resources, not just when it comes to food commodities per se, but also all of the resources that are important for food production, including water, including land, and including soil. We also need to support local farmers and companies for promoting localized production and consumption if we really want international food trade to serve the goals and contribute to the goals of a circular economy. If you can go to the next slide, please. When it comes to solution, again, we listed many. Here are just a few that were considered as more important and were discussed a little bit into more details. Food quality and sustainable production standards to stimulate producers to reduce environmental impacts of production for accessing the market. So we need new standards that really start from the production stage and kind of stimulate circular production, if you wish, and then the market would have to act as a filtering tool, let's say, only accepting what is more sustainable, and this could drive or should drive production towards more sustainable and circular food. On the other hand, we do not just have to act on what is missing, but we also have to correct what is wrong now with the food system. So we have also to remove policies that are out there now that actually are inhibiting these circular practices. And these include, of course, current trade agreements that might favor a certain type of production systems. So it is not just about designing better standards and tools for circularity, but it's also about removing these incentives and or wrong incentives that are out there at the moment. When it comes to long-term solutions, we need on a very general level to include circular economy principles in trade agreements. So circular economy goals of reusing, repurposing, redistributing, they have to be integrated in trade agreements, which of course currently do not touch on any of these goals. So that's important if we really want to connect international food trade with the circular economy. We also talked about meta regulation, so a standard for standards approach that could help to align various existing market standards for food and agriculture with circular economy goals. So of course, similarly to what's said for agriculture, also when it comes to international food trade, standards are important, but we also have to recognize that in the global market we have different needs, and so we need to create some kind of guiding principle for standards, but then within those guiding principles allow for adaptability and flexibility of standards when it comes to different categories of commodities, for example, or to different needs of different countries, for example. So this is in summary what we discussed about. And yeah, I'll leave the floor now to Gina again.
Thank you so much, Luca. Thank you so much, Dóra, for bringing up this summary to all of us. I think I would like to compliment you for this hard work on behalf of all participants and organizers as well, because it was not an easy task to take. I now would like to introduce the first expert that will be commenting on those presentations, Anita NEVILLE. She is Chief Sustainability and Corporate Communication Officer at the Agri-Resources. She has been responsible for the design and implementation of the company's overall sustainability and communications strategy. She has worked in sustainability and communications for more than 25 years, with different roles in different organizations. I will introduce speakers one by one, but we will all stay in one session. So now I will pass the floor to Anita to comment on the final plenary presentation.
Thanks, Gina, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you for this interesting wrap-up of what sounds like it was a fascinating couple of days conversation. I took advantage of looking at some of the Padlets and some of the videos to sort of see the kinds of conversations and inputs that you've had. Given that I work for a global palm oil-based plantation company and producer, I was particularly interested in streams 1 and 2 on agriculture and also on the role, perhaps surprisingly, of SMEs in the circular food system. But in hearing the presentations back, actually lots to talk about across all 4 streams. Let's maybe look at agriculture. Regenerative agriculture and agroecology, I think, is having something of an ascendance in our conversation generally about global food systems, and rightly so. We have started to recognise the importance of healthy soils and healthy ecosystems, even more than we have done traditionally when it comes to food production globally. I do think, however, and it was noted in, I think, at least one of the Padlet comments that I saw, that it's important to look at regenerative agricultural practices in context and to think about, local requirements or specifications, as well as crop-specific issues when addressing what regenerative agriculture might need to look like, and particularly when thinking about it at scale. This is something that we're talking about quite a lot within our own business, because palm is a crop that is, quite clearly planted in what are perceived to be a monoculture plantation environment, but they last in the landscape for 25 to 30 years in terms of their productivity. So there's very little soil disruption or underlying ground cover disruption through that process of harvesting over those 25 to 30 years. And in that way, it can have regenerative elements in its agricultural production. I think interesting to see how we accommodate particularly tree-based crops when thinking about regenerative agricultural practices and how those kinds of monoculture in terms of what you're harvesting, but perhaps biodiverse in terms of the overall environment, crops can be accommodated in our thinking about these practices. Similarly, we're looking at the potential for agroecology in terms of supporting smallholder and rural community livelihoods, and I was really pleased to see some of that come through in the conversations around the subsidies, or I would say commercially available ecosystem services payments that might become available for communities involved in agroecology or regenerative agriculture. At the recent COP26, it was gratifying to see some kind of resolution around Article 6 and carbon trading, which may actually finally realise payments to smallholder farmers and forest-based communities for leaving forest standing or for farming in a more forest-sensitive manner. And I hope that we can realise the ambitions of that conference. Just quickly on SMEs, for me, these are often, agri-SMEs are often the forgotten connective tissue that enable food systems to really work. They're a fundamentally important part of our business, even if we are ourselves considered a massive player, right? So great to see a focus particularly on access to finance for these important players. They often suffer the same kinds of challenges as their smallholder counterparts in relation to access to finance, because they have poor credit ratings, they're not necessarily banked. They don't necessarily have good financial literacy. So the need for really targeted support to build up these communities of agri-SMEs is fundamental. And I would encourage those of you who are interested in this area to look at an initiative by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development through its Global Agribusiness Action for Equitable Livelihoods, which is like way too many words, really. But we developed an agri-SME digital finance platform to better connect small businesses that are looking for investment with financial players who want to make those kinds of investments. So I think, again, in the Padlets, there was a note about SMEs not necessarily understanding how to access finance, like knowing where to start. And this tool, which is looking to connect these two parts of the equation, the SMEs with the financial community, is really looking to help make that process easier, and also to enable players like Golden Agri-Resources to facilitate the connection of agri-SMEs that are important to our business or operating in the proximity to our business with these financial institutions and investors. So I thoroughly encourage you to look up that tool if you're interested in this space. And perhaps, Gina, I'll pause there for the moment.
Thank you so much, Anita, for this input. I think it brought a lot of food for thought, as we call it. We will now move to another excellent speaker and expert, Beverley POSTMA. She is an accomplished policy expert and fundraiser in sustainable development and has worked hand in hand with nonprofits, government, and multinational companies to design scalable solutions that are both sustainable and inclusive. So you are excellently placed to also comment on the output of our conference. You have been appointed as an interim director of Grow Asia, a multi-stakeholder platform established in 2015 by the World Economic Forum in collaboration with ASEAN to build action-focused partnership for inclusive, resilient, and sustainable food systems. So, Beverley, the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to your commentary.
Thank you very much, Gina. And let me echo many of Anita's remarks that, as always, were very, very spot on and really reflect the amount of conversation that you've had in the last 2 days. I tried to dip into as many of those conversations as an attendee, and I heard some very rich discussions. And it really gives us confidence that these events are actually discussing actions, because I think all too often we've found that the conversations stays at the high level problem statement, and you've really drilled down into specific actions, which I think should be commended. I would particularly like to pick up on tracks 2 and 4, but as Anita says, there are red threads through all of these, and so I hope these comments can be valuable across all 4 of the tracks. Grow Asia was specifically designed as a multi-stakeholder platform to move from talking to doing. I think what we've found, our experience is that multi-stakeholder policy making is starting to become much richer now. We are seeing wide range of actors participating at the policy making level. I think where we end up encountering blockages is maintaining that diversity of views and ideas all the way through from policy making, policy design, all the way through into practical implementation. And this was the problem that Grow Asia was set up to solve. And so I would echo many of the comments of the rapporteurs that inclusive value chains are essential if we are to build more resilient, climate positive food systems. And Anita was absolutely right that the small and medium-sized enterprise and the micro enterprise, the very small farming units, especially in Southeast Asia, are absolutely essential, not just to building sustainable food systems, but also to building sustainable economies for their countries. And I utterly agree that we need to involve those business leaders in policy making, but that is very problematic. I think any of us that have tried to engage the right communities in policy discussions have encountered the same challenges. Policy discussions typically take place in buildings in cities, not on farms in remote rural communities. And it's very, very difficult to expect the owner of a small rural business to give up the time from their family enterprise to spend time sitting in a boardroom in a city or engaging in a policy dialogue in a language that they're not fluent or literate in. So we need to really identify these very specific barriers to success. The way we can solve that, I think it's already been raised, is that when we move from policy making and into implementation, we really need to work through the trusted impact pathways that have already been forged. We have a tendency to want to reinvent new platforms and new instruments and new mechanisms every time we come up with a new policy solution. But actually, there are tried and tested mechanisms that have all the way through the value chains, the right actors at the table. And this includes all key decision makers, government from global, regional, national and community level. We need to involve government leaders all the way down into jurisdictional roles, like the mayors of cities and provincial governors have a very vital role to play, not just in policy making, but also in implementation. Grassroots NGOs and civil society groups, that their remit is to represent SMEs who cannot give time up to come and sit in day-long policy discussions. And big companies, I mean, more and more I'm seeing evidence of companies like Anita's that are truly committed to being a vector, not just a policy design at the high level, but at the delivery level as well. So we need to break down silos, not just at the policy decision-making level, but also at the implementation level, all the way into the field. That means, in my mind, drilling into commodity value chains. As you know, there's a difference between a supply chain and a value chain. A value chain has very specific linkages and actors, usually selling one product into the market. And this is where Grow Asia, I think, has seen its biggest successes in value chains like coffee, where you actually put all of the actors in that coffee value chain, from the government making policy to the producer, processing and manufacturing partners, all the way down into the small business in the field. Because if you then develop policies and actions that are relevant to that specific value chain, we really then can design an impact pathway that delivers meaningful technology transfer at the other end. I want to just pick up on one other thing as well, and because I haven't heard it referenced in the rapporteur statements as much as I would have expected it to, and that this is the role of women's economic empowerment in both trade policy and in inclusive value chains. We know, and there's been some fabulous reports written, including during the pandemic. GrowAsia has focused on economic empowerment for women as one of its key themes during the pandemic. And what we found is that unless we address fundamental challenges in financial literacy through training and capacity building, in access to e-commerce solutions, by putting the technology providers closer to those that need to use those e-commerce solutions, and also to address the very difficult issues of land title and understand what it's going to take to allow women the freedom and access, not just to these tools, but to access to land ownership, which is often a big barrier in Southeast Asia. So to sum up, channel implementation through well-tested multi-stakeholder partnerships rather than creating new models, and seek out those proven pathways to really challenge ourselves. Are we moving beyond policy to action and getting technology into the hands of SMEs and smallholders, particularly women business leaders? Thank you very much.
So much, Beverley, and I cannot thank you enough for bringing the issue of women empowerment to the mix. Maybe it didn't come across during our discussions, but ASEF has been working very closely on ensuring gender equality and balance, and ensuring that also when we design our conference program, we do have representative both regarding gender and also we call it Asia-Europe balance, which is like the combination of having different voices from Asia, different voices from Europe, but at the same time, we are trying to make sure that we do not have panels that are dominated by one gender. In that case, like we are trying not to have panels that are dominated mostly also by men. Sometimes it results as in this panel. As you can see, this is the panel of all ladies. And I have to say, we are one of the very few conference platforms that actually have this tendency that we have experts that are women leaders, that are experts in their field, that are leading organizations and are recognized in the field. So I just would like to thank you also for agreeing to join this panel, because it is much more challenging to have expertise from women leaders, given the numbers. As simple as that, the challenge is in numbers, not in the expertise. Having said that, I would like to now give the floor to Madhura. She's currently a researcher at Food Claims Center Venlo in Netherlands. She's a social scientist and extremely interested in the field of public policy, food law, and sustainability. In general, her interests were focused on business and management aspects of the food industry. And she has been interested in food safety research specifically, specializing in the application of safety regulation in food supply chains. Her current research interests are looking into the role of business in preventing the valorizing food waste. Madhura, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gina. Also, a big thank you for the organizers for having me on board. It's been 2 very enriching days learning about the issue that I work on from an academic and a researcher's perspective. It's been very interesting to hear the perspectives of the industry, but also representatives from international organizations and leaders who are making a change in this area. As academicians, we sometimes tend to work in silos. And I think it is very valuable to also take in input from all different directions and work towards improving the interconnectedness between what is happening on ground and what is happening in our labs and in universities. Having said that, I was able to participate and join 3 live streams out of the 4 that took place, so I will be commenting on those. I would like to highlight some of my favorite points and some interesting solutions that I was able to hear in these 2 days, starting with the stream on SMEs. It became very clear from the presentations as well as the input that was provided by the audience, the role of SMEs in innovation and their capacity to contribute to the circular economy must be recognized by policymakers, which also means that appropriate access to finance and infrastructure is something that must be promoted by governments. Improved literacy among consumers, but also SMEs and other actors regarding circularity and how circularity in the food system, that is the circular bioeconomy, is different from the broader concept of the circular economy must be addressed. This is not only for SMEs, but also in a broader context. Various policy areas on circularity must be better connected with one another so that contradicting or competing policies are not created or implemented. This is, of course, something that affects businesses in general, but SMEs often do not have, as Ms. POSTMA just said, they do not often have the time to be at these roundtables and policy-making sessions to voice their concerns. So it is something that must be taken into consideration to not make it more difficult for them by creating contradictory policies. Moving to policy and security, the issue of food safety standards being limited was raised. A big part of my research focuses on food safety in the circular economy. And I absolutely agree that food safety being limited in the context of food security is something that we do come across a lot. Access to safe food is a human right, and consumers should never have to choose between sustainable and safe food. Food safety is consumers' and citizens' right, and policymakers and in turn governments must be sensitive to the changing nature of food safety risks in the face of innovation and sustainability. Coming to international trade, standard setting must be equitable. All stakeholders, including farmers, smallholders, small and medium enterprises, must be represented. When multinational corporations from high-income countries, and by that I mean specifically retailers from the global north who are very powerful actors in this context, have disproportionate power in the standard setting process, international trade cannot be fair. Meta-regulation can be a way to harmonize requirements and reduce the burden of upstream actors, as well as tackle the risks that our food supply chains will face in the coming years due to climate change and actions that are taken to mitigate it. This was a very short summing up of some very interesting ideas that came up from these conversations. There was a lot more that was said, and the rapporteurs did an excellent job, of course, in giving us a highlight of what happened. But yeah, this is what I thought was the most interesting aspect of these streams.
Thank you so much. I just would like to have one final closing question, because I somehow I am thinking about what Beverley said, like not to invent new platforms and new solutions, because every time when there is new policy, there is new mechanism to implement it and global discussion and so on and so forth. So if we could have something that, like if we could get advice from you, because as Asia Europe Environment Forum, we are relatively small player in this global discussion on very big issues. So when you are thinking about it, sometimes it is challenging for us also to place the discussion in a way that brings added value to the mix. If you could, based on the solutions that you think can make a difference, but also like what you have seen today at the plenary, given the people we can bring to the table, if you can recommend for us the direction that you think could leverage on existing dialogues or existing platforms, what would be your suggestion for us? I know that I am putting you a little bit on the spot, but I'm also more than confident that it can be handled. Anita, would you mind to share your thoughts?
Gosh, I want to make sure that I understand the question that you're posing to us, Gina. You're wanting to identify where we think some existing platforms offer opportunity for change. Is that correct? It's
more like we are the organization that can offer the platform for dialogue. And then like we can do the dialogue in the informal fashion, connecting different international agencies, SMEs, different kind of policy officials. And obviously we wouldn't like to replicate existing structures. So as I said, I'm somehow thinking about what Beverley said, like what would be the best position for us. It is just like asking for advice where do you think we might be helpful from your perspective? Like if you were to have a discussion with different stakeholders, like where would you place us?
So I think what's interesting at the moment from an Asia-Europe perspective is obviously there is a something of a disconnect in where Europe is today in terms of its sustainability and overall environmental performance and its expectations in the food marketplace related to where it is in its own performance and where Asia is, and also the makeup of farming and agricultural systems between those two geographic locations. And I think that it's important, and I say this as, clearly a white Australian working in Southeast Asia, I think it's really important for us to be able to bridge understanding of how these different systems work. So when I talk to European audiences about the palm sector, for example, many people only see organizations like my own, which is a large palm oil producer, when the reality is that about 40% of production is independent smallholder based, right? So what we need to be able to do is create pathways that help each other understand the working realities of our environments better, and to then adopt policies to the international food trade stream that ensure equal or equitable access to markets. And I think perhaps one of the ways that the Asia Europe Foundation and this particular forum can do that is by providing forums for dialogue to explain some of that sort of practical reality on the ground between those two sets of expectations. And apologies, I may not be explaining this particularly well at this end of my day, but what I find is that we are often talking at cross purposes when we talk about the kinds of policies that will better enable sustainable agricultural practices to be adopted, particularly by the smallest actors in supply chains. And so being able to bring some of those working realities together so that those people making decisions about, as Madhura said, retailers in the global north make powerful decisions that impact smallholders in the global south. How can we demonstrate the impact of those decisions more powerfully, and a multi-stakeholder dialogue like the one you're able to convene here perhaps offers us that kind of powerful way to demonstrate those things in action. As I said, I may be poorly describing that, but I think there is a role for better understanding between Asia and Europe, given the important relationship between those two geographic entities in terms of food trade.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing this up. We have some connection challenge with Beverley. I just would like to check with Madhura, because as a researcher, you are engaged in different discussions. So where would you think we could help also in the challenges you are doing, or the platform that are connecting Asia and Europe? What is, in your opinion, the added value of having the discussion on the Asia-Europe bi-regional level?
What I did, it was my first time being part of an event that is organized by you. What I did notice is that it's not only one way, so it's not just experts who are speaking and the audience is listening, which is what we see happening quite often in these expert talks or forums, where it's just one way and there's not really scope for dialogue. What I particularly enjoyed in these sessions is that the audience was very engaged. We received some very interesting, some very thought-provoking suggestions from the audience. I was very actively following the Padlet. So that is something that I think takes expertise and time to build, to be able to build an audience that trusts you enough to share their knowledge, share their experience. It was also mentioned that it's quite likely that people in the audience who are tuning in are experts on certain subjects and might know more about a specific area than someone who's speaking on the subject. So it is very nice, I think, that you have this kind of a relationship with an audience who is invested and who is very interested in making a difference. So that is something that could really help in voicing concerns or even improving the relationship between stakeholders in Asia and Europe. So that is something that could be taken forward, in my opinion. Yeah, that is.
Can I just pick up on that, actually, that Madhura raised there, because the Padlets, I think, were really interesting to me. It's not a technology that I've come across before. And I think oftentimes, Bev mentioned this point as well, oftentimes these discussions happen, first of all, in English, secondly, in cities, where the actors are accomplished in participating in this kind of forum, you know, the ability to leap in to create a point after somebody else has eloquently spoken. And what I thought was interesting about the Padlets, in my observation of them, was the opportunity to chip in, to provide comment and often expert opinion as well, in that sort of written format and have it appear in the Padlet. You know, that's a really useful tool for engaging a dialogue with communities in Asia and in other places where, you know, English isn't a first language, or whether there may be a reluctance to speak up, even where that person does have expertise that exceeds the speaker at the time. And now that she's back, I'm going to cede my speaking slot to a more expert person than me, Bev.
Dear Beverley, welcome back. This all was triggered by you. I have to admit it, because I didn't plan to have another question, but somehow you triggered this in my mind, and I just couldn't resist to ask. If you were to advise us, like, how we can better contribute to this international discussion without replicating what is already existing, given the capacity we have and the topics and audience we can engage, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry if anything I say repeats the other experts. I'm afraid technology was working against me today. But that's going to be the theme of my answer. I've always been hugely impressed with my interactions with the Asia Europe Foundation. You've always been quite cutting edge in applying not just knowledge, but tools and technology to take the knowledge that one step further. I was very fortunate to participate quite coincidentally in your pandemic response workshop back in 2012. Who knew that that was going to be so dearly required? But one thing you did then was you did two things really, really well. First of all, you hosted the event in one of the most difficult places to host it, which was in Laos. You know, you chose to go to a difficult destination for everyone, and that was really important. You were much closer to the field, to people sitting in Vientiane than you would be sitting in London or Paris. And I thought that was powerful. Secondly, you brought in very, very innovative role modeling tools that really positioned us in the closest we could get to a very real scenario. You did these amazing scenario planning sessions that scared the living daylights out of us, but now we realize that it was all very, very real. And I think you can apply that to any situation. And I'd say the only thing I would recommend, it's really following up on Anita's point, is to go the next step, because the last mile is always the hardest. But use technology in the last mile as well. I've been in Asia for 13 years now, and one thing that I am truly amazed at is the high level of social media usage among smallholder agriculture businesses, particularly in Indonesia. I could be wrong, but I think Indonesia has the largest Facebook community in the world. Second largest, thanks, Anita, after the US, I presume. But I think it really speaks to the fact that small business leaders might be busy and too busy to go to meetings, but they are the most sophisticated users of digital technology in any small and medium-sized enterprise environment I found. Business leaders, particularly women farmers, are using mobile technologies to access information. They're not going to sit down and read a 20-page policy statement, I'm sorry, but they will engage in a simple digital questionnaire on an iPhone or in a Facebook group or in a LinkedIn group. So I think it's about doing what you're good at, being innovative, but really challenging yourselves to close the last mile and use those established systems to get to real business leaders in small and rural communities, and use Facebook. Use these, again, don't reinvent mechanisms. We've got fabulous digital tools. Let's use them and overcome these barriers to access. So everything has to be in the language of the user. Everything has to be simple enough that you can answer the question in 10 minutes while you're taking a quick break from spraying your field or planting your crop. These business leaders are not sitting at desks all day typing into computers. They're out there, but they want to be engaged in decisions about their lives. And we've got to stop romancing this idea of the smallholder farmer. These are sophisticated, often female business leaders who want their businesses to be better, and they want their product to be sold into global value chains. So good luck, but just keep doing more of what you're doing because you're already very good at it.
Thank you so much, for Beverley, and thank you so much, Anita and Madhura. Those remarks were not sponsored. I just want to highlight. But it's always also for us when we work for a couple of months to prepare something, and there's always this level of anxiety, whether people will like it or not. It's like the honey coating for what we have done so far, and I will obviously cherish this feedback from all of you. Thank you so much, ladies. That was very insightful. We will definitely have now a lot of insights to have a look and decide where we will be going from here. Having said that, I would like to close this experts commentary and reporting session and invite you all warmly to the presentation by Convoy that will be sharing the, I think, intention was one-pager report from all the conference that summarizes all the issues that were discussed in a written statement. So we have something directly accessible after the conference that we can share with everybody. Thank you so much, and hope you will join us for the final plenary.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, good evening, good day to everybody who's still with us. I think we've had a fascinating couple of days. I was asked as a co-organizer of the forum to produce a communique at the end, basically to sum up what we have been talking about and what conclusions we reached and what kind of consensus we were able to form. And I have to say to everybody, this is not supposed to be a detailed report on everything that was said, everything that was thought, and everything that was brought to the forum, but it is supposed to give an idea of what we all agreed upon. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing word for word. I don't think there's any need for that because we're all literate people. But basically, let me start at the beginning, which seems as good a place as any to begin. We had some remarkable presentations from the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany, Gerd Müller, and from Daniel Gustafsson, who's special advisor to the Director General of the FAO. And the interesting thing was that they actually said much the same thing, but from slightly different angles. The main message they were trying to transmit to us was that we're in a situation of urgency But that doesn't mean to say we're in a situation of despair. They pointed out that there are many ways that we can deal with the current threat to the food system, and that many of these ways are already starting. And they mentioned both of them, COP26, the United Nations Community of Practice on climate. And they particularly identified the efforts being made to raise finance in support of mitigation and adaptation to climate change in pursuit of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So having begun with that, we then went a little bit closer to the meat of the question, if you will forgive me the pun. And we had presentations from Henrietta Goddard from the Food Initiative at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and from Katyusha Farah from the World Food Programme. Now, they were very specific about what they had to say. And the main message that they brought, building upon what had been said in the keynote, was that a circular approach to agriculture is actually a sensible one. It's not some kind of a trendy mechanism for people to discuss around coffee. It's actually a practical way of implementing agricultural policies and producing food in a way that respects the environment, respects the future, and respects life forms of the planet. They also pointed out, both of them, the special importance of adapting solutions to local circumstances, which is interesting because, if we can just scroll down a bit further, which is interesting because in agriculture, we went straight into the idea of regenerative agriculture and the 6 principles, which I won't go into now, but you can see that in the overall report that we'll be producing later. And regenerative agriculture kept coming up, but dealing with it in this particular section, it was seen as an essential opportunity for adapting to climate change in a sustainable way. In other words, by using regenerative agriculture, we can reduce the kinds of things that are very bad for the environment and for dealing with climate change. And this was embraced, I think, by participants in the agriculture session. And it was repeated again and again that this kind of thing can only really be implemented if there's some kind of a cooperative approach between the public authorities and private actors. And in fact, this was one of the main takeaways from that session, this idea of an alliance and cooperation between different levels, between government, the private sector, NGOs, and farmers themselves, all along the value chain. And this is something that came up again and again. Could we move to the next section, please? And this is where we got to talking about the circular economy per se. And I think that the general opinion was certainly amongst the speakers and also amongst the participants that this is the same sort of area where we can talk about a collaborative relationship between action-oriented private groups, NGOs, producers, and farmers, in order to identify the most effective and the most appropriate circular economy approach to the production of food, and not just to the production of food, but to the marketing of food and to the whole value chain. But there was a need for education, for training, for the public authorities, for farmers themselves, for others along the value chain, actually to take this idea seriously, examine what they have to do in order to implement the change to a circular economy, and especially how to involve SMEs along the value chain in the whole process of the circularization of the food system. Next one, please. When it came to food policy and security, there was an observation that donors and the international organizations are reorienting their efforts towards support for carbon neutral methods of food farming, which of course is might be a laudable objective, but it's not quite so easy to implement. And it was recognized by participants and by speakers that we need a whole supply chain approach and diversification is an essential part of the strategy. Economic incentives, very important in to encourage positive change, maximize efficiency, and raise living standards and food security, because the two are linked. Production rates are actually only part of the picture. You can raise production rates but kill the planet. That's not a very good idea. So people recognize that what was important was raising production at the same time as we can use sustainable methods and circular methods to ensure that there will be food on the table for generations to come. It was also very important, and it was mentioned in the last session, the role of women specifically came up in the food policy and security session. And of course, it's essential because women as smallholders and as farmers in developing countries are a major, perhaps the major part of the workforce depending on the country. Now, we are also cognizant of the fact that growing demand for food is also taking place in places that actually have a lot of pressure on land and on water. And this is an equation that we're going to have to resolve because the international food trade, which we'll be touching on in a moment, cannot resolve all these problems immediately. This is an oil tanker, and if anybody's tried to turn around an oil tanker, then you'll know that it's a very long, time-consuming and dangerous process. This is the same problem we have with finding sustainable land management practices that can increase production at the same time as saving the planet. And finally, if we can just go to the next section, international food trade. Again, a positive approach to reducing the greenhouse gases impact of the trade in food is complementary to expanding access to food for disadvantaged communities and the global poor. The influence of multinational corporations, and we had multinational corporations speaking in the session, in the food trade, is overwhelming, and they are able to adapt to regulations and to influence regulations, in fact. But they're also instrumental in allowing smallholders and producers access to global markets. So we need to reconcile the two, and there needs to be some kind of a alliance between the multinational corporations and the smaller producers. And this kind of an alliance can operate within a circular economy and with sustainable development principles to the regulatory environment. And policymakers globally are moving now from crisis management to recovery planning. Governments need to increase coordination to avoid further global disruption to food supplies, and they need to elevate market confidence. But they should not lose sight of pre-existing challenges. There are opportunities for section and the need to the sector, and the need to continue reliance and the advancement of science and innovation more than ever is critical to increasing a food resilient economy. The increased global focus on food supply and the need for resilient food systems will create opportunities to accelerate discussions of agricultural innovations. Now, innovation, we heard over and over again, is absolutely crucial. Innovation will solve our problems, or at least will contribute to the solution of our problems. Innovation plus adaptation of pre-existing methods and practices will be the way we're going to reach a solution. Private operators with a global reach can contribute to enhancing the resilience of the food trade by working with distributors, food retailers, and each other. That's very important to ensure supply lines remain open and responsive. The food trade is currently inefficient and unequal. It serves the high-income countries well, but leaves millions in food insecurity and hunger. We need wide reform to resolve that problem. So we reach a conclusion after this 2 days. And I think I'm speaking for everybody here who has participated in this. Reforming the food system in line with regeneration and circularity will require action on at least 4 levels. Government, producers, including large enterprises and small farmers, enablers, that means people along the value chain, and consumers. The reform should be a global priority, and this was recognized at COP26. Long-term solutions will require specific financing for reform at each of the levels of implementation. Training and knowledge transfer is key for actors along the food chain, the food value chain, and the supply chain to implement their own reform practices to support the transition to circular agriculture. So that, I think, is the one-pager turned into a three-pager that I was asked to prepare after this 2 days. With that, this is in draft. It will be slightly changed, but you have the basic model there for your consideration. And with that, I hand back to Gina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Colm, for compiling all the insights from all the speakers and all the sessions. This is, I think, for us, first time we managed to have like the report ready at the conference itself. So definitely compliments to you for that. Having said that, I would like to thank all the speakers, and without taking the attention from our Asia Europe Environment Forum partners, I would like to move now to the closing remarks. And the first distinguished speaker will be His Excellency Ambassador Léon FABER. He has been with us since last year as Deputy Executive Director of the Asia Europe Foundation. He is a seasoned career diplomat with over 30 years of experience. His previous postings include being head of a mission of European Union delegation to the Lao PDR and Deputy Secretary General at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Luxembourg. Ambassador Faber, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gina. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you. And no, let me start by this. First of all, I think that this is a very useful and very relevant topic that we have had this year on the circular food systems and solutions to reverse climate change. I think nothing could be more relevant at this time. So let me first, on behalf of Asia Europe Foundation, thank all our partners and our gratitude to the ENVforum partners. So the government of Sweden through the strategic collaborative fund administered by Stockholm Environmental Institute, the Hans Seidel Foundation, the ASEM SMEs Eco Innovation Center, and the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. These have all for the last 18 years been successfully contributed to foster Asia-Europe discourse on sustainable development. Now here stops my official words, and I thank Gina very much for the preparation that she has done for me, but I will not go into that because it will be more or less a repetition of what has been said already before. But let me take up just a few ideas, and again, I would like to commend all of you who have participated for the very high quality discussions that I have unfortunately only partially been able to follow, but it convinced me that this is a very relevant forum, and we have indeed some touched upon very crucial points. So in the agricultural session, in the SMEs and the circular food systems, the food policy, and in the international trade. One point that I heard over the last 2 hours was, for instance, the policy coherence. I think that is indeed something that is extremely important, but also very difficult to implement, especially. And I would like to come to the comments that Anita made on the dialogue platform, and how it is, for instance, how big policies that are being done in the global north indeed have an impact on the smallholders in this case, in particular in Southeast Asia. So, and I think the palm oil is in that regard indeed something so telling, because of course, if in Europe you say palm oil, everybody shouts that this is not ecological and so on, and then we even do impose sanctions, and this has obviously a very, very large impact on the smallholders. At the same time, then we try, like Europe tries together with ASEAN, to establish working groups to sort something out. And indeed, I think that is coming back to the question where ASEF stands. I think that is indeed the platform that we would like to be, to play the go-between between civil society in that case, of course, also the smallholders, SMEs, and versus government, and of course also the big food industry, because I think at the same time we cannot avoid, and we have to involve them as well. I like, of course, when I think Beverley said we are cutting edge. I'm honestly, that is a very, very high compliment for us, and we take that. But I think there's so many things that need to be taken up, and these issues are so interconnected that it cannot be done by one single person or one single organization. So we really have to work with this interdependency and the connectedness among the people and work on that, and hopefully bring these all together. So we are in that case, of course, also very open to suggestions by our partners and how we can do better also in the future. I think that the Environment Forum, if I may say that, I find it has very good branding in my view. It is very well known. Largely due to the efforts also of Gina and her team, so whom I really would also like to thank here, and of course all our partners. But I think there's also a need to reach out further and become, in that sense, more relevant. And I would, in that vein, also like to ask all of you to give us advice and tell us how we can even do better together with you. So let me stop here. I think you have spent 2 very interesting days, and I think it's also very good to have this put that together in a report that we hopefully will be able to disseminate duly and appropriately in the right places, and hopefully we will indeed be able to contribute whatever small scale to help all concerned, especially I think also the smallholders. Gina mentioned that I was ambassador of the EU to Laos, and somebody mentioned coffee. Honestly, it is a headache. It was a headache. Laos has, for instance, such a great potential, but to make Laos an exporter, there you see, for instance, how you have to bring together government, private sector, and the value chains, how transport, all of that together to make the difference. So again, let me stop here. Thank you very much, all of you, and hopefully we will be able to cooperate in the future as well. So thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Ambassador FABER, thank you for your closing remarks. I would like to now introduce Yasuo Takahashi, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Japan. Mr. Takahashi has been holding key position at the Ministry of Environment, including Director of the Climate Policy Division, Director General of the Headquarters for Environmental Restoration of Fukushima, and Director General of the Environment Management Bureau, and Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, among many others. We have been working with the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies since the inception of the Asia-Europe Environment Forum in 2003, and it has been always our valuable and cherished partner in all our endeavors under the umbrella of Asia-Europe Environment Forum. Mr. Takahashi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gina, for your very kind introduction, and I'm very pleased to come here. So good morning and good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to see the lively discussions yesterday and today at the ENVforum 2021, Circular Food Systems Solution to Reverse Climate Change. The COVID-19 pandemic since last year has brought about drastic changes in our socio-economic structure, lifestyles, and values. Under difficult circumstances, Many conferences and forums worldwide have shifted to online or hybrid of online and face-to-face meetings. ENVforum has taken on a sophisticated format. So I would like to convey my gratitude to ASEF, the Hans Seider Foundation, and the Stockholm Environment Institute for their efforts in preparing the valuable conference. The pandemic has still had an enormous impact on human lives and the socioeconomy. Nevertheless, the last 2 years have seen continued debate and action on a range of critical issues for a sustainable society. During October and November, CBD and UNFCCC has held their conferences of parties, respectively. Regarding the biodiversity, unfortunately, many of the Aichi targets have not been achieved. It is desired that post-2020 biodiversity framework will include more ambitious targets to accelerate transformation towards a society where people and nature can live in harmony. On climate change, the shift to a 1.5 degrees target and the establishment of the rules necessary to implement the Paris Agreement could be seen as substantial achievements. However, realizing the 1.5 degrees target will require even bolder actions on many fronts, including energy, forests, and land use, and our daily behavior. IGES is also organizing the large annual international forum called the International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, or IACP 2021, at the same time as the ENVforum. This year's theme of ASEP is a decisive decade to lead to the future toward integrated solutions for climate, biodiversity, and other global challenges. We recognize that the next decade is a decisive period to learn from the past few years and set a course for a sustainable society in the future. We discussed the need to integrate climate change, biodiversity, conservation, improving resource efficiency, and the transition to a circular economy, community regeneration, and disaster management. The theme of the 2021 ENVforum, Food System Transitions, is one of the most critical issues in envisioning and promoting action in a post-pandemic world. As was discussed in the UN Food System Summit, transformation of the global food system is an essential condition for sustainable and resilient societies. Production, distribution, consumption, and waste management of foods have crucial influences on climate and ecosystem globally. To achieve sustainable food system, I think it is very important to secure the quality of and quantity of food, protect the livelihoods of producers, expand ways to preserve the natural resources and ecosystems involved in the production, and build resilience to shock and stresses. Asia has an essential place in the food value chain, and this importance will continue to grow. According to the OECD and FAO's Agriculture Outlook 2021 to 2030, it is expected to account for 50% of global agriculture and fishery production by 2030. It is vital to ensure that intensified production does not lead to environmental pollution and ecological destruction. Changes in the food production will directly affect the livelihoods of small-scale farmers, fishers, processors, and distributors, including SMEs and the people who work for them. It is vital to strengthen measures to stabilize the livelihoods. At the same time, the growing middle class in Asian cities is adopting Western ways of living, including food consumption. According to the Agriculture Outlook, the average calorie intake in the region will reach 3,000 kilocalories by 2030 through the increased consumption of fats, oils, sugars, and meat. Thus, Asia, which already accounts 30% of global food imports, is going to exert more pressure on the ecosystems of the food exporting areas as well as the global climate. The transition towards sustainable food system in Asia contributes to the fight against global climate change. Technological solutions to the challenges are essential, but socio-economic approaches are also vital. The 4 areas of focus of the ENVforum are therefore essential elements of whole system change. For example, the agriculture session focused on regenerative agriculture and environmental and health safety. The idea of regeneration in agriculture is a novel one. However, let's look at it differently. We can understand it as an attempt to re-evaluate the traditional practices of Asian agricultural societies and revitalize them in a modern context. It enables the transformation of agricultural production activities to create changes in the lifestyles of those who work in agriculture and local communities and food systems. It also allows local societies to uptake renewable energy sources and to be better prepared for disasters. We hope such innovative attempts at the local and producer level will evolve in interaction with community energy and other systems, national food policy, and international trade. Beyond agriculture, there's much potential for innovation in the region. Smallholder producers, processors, governments, and civil society can create a sustainable and resilient food system together. Stakeholders in Asia and Europe can learn from one another to spread the innovation and achieve sustainable food system globally. I hope that all of us will find unique opportunities for changes in our countries. We would hope to see you again at the next year's forum with more innovative solutions you bring in. Let us continue the discussion for further actions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takahashi. It is always good to work with IGES and have your support in our activities. Having said that, I would also like to introduce now our consortium partner from Korea, ASEM Eco-Innovation Center, which is the organization that has been created as the result of the Asia-Europe Meeting Initiative. We have Dr. Choong-lai with us, and he will be joining through video remarks. Dr. Shaw has more than 30 years of experience working on environmental engineering and sustainable technology management of different telecom companies. He served as an advisor to the National Sustainable Development Committee and National Science and Technology Committee. I will now move to the video remarks from Dr. Shaw.
Distinguished guests and participants of the ENVforum Annual Conference 2021, I am Choong-lai, Secretary General of ASEM's Eco-Innovation Center. It is my great pleasure to make the closing remarks. First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our partners, Asia-Europe Foundation, Stockholm Environment Institute, Hans Zeidel Foundation, and Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. For the past 2 days, the topics of circular food system, solution to reverse climate change, served as an excellent opportunity to learn about many things. At a time when ESG is becoming a global trend, it is meaningful to include for small and medium-sized business in this year's ENVforum. Recently, not only large companies, but also small and medium-sized companies have been emphasized in Korea to achieve ESG. As the market environment changes rapidly due to COVID-19 and the climate crisis, establishing a sustainable food production and consumption system should be considered first. And we must pay more attention to the development of digital technology that makes this possible. Since 2012, ASEIC has participated in the ENVforum, broadening the knowledge of SDG and organizing various activities to improve SDG awareness within ASEM region, including my country, Korea. This year, the virtual Ecothon for eco entrepreneurs was held in 5 ASEAN member countries. We were able to discover more than 15 food startups which can contribute to circular food production and consumption. ASEIC will continue to provide various support to discover these innovative startups in the future. Finally, I would like to thank all speakers, guests, and participants who made this conference possible. I hope to meet everyone face to face at next year's annual conference when COVID-19 comes to an end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaw, for providing closing remarks. We are now heading towards the end. There are 2 things I would like to bring to your attention before we can call it a day. One of them is related with the feedback. We have been sharing the barcode and the information about the evaluation form. We would like to hear from you, how can we do better and what we did right. This is for us very valuable information because we exist in order to provide platform for connecting different voices from Asia and Europe on the environmental issues. And this is our major objective in organizing any event. And also as an incentive, if you fill in the feedback, we will be delighted to share with you a certificate of participation. On another note, we would be also disseminating, after having the overall check of the closing statement that will summarize all the discussions during the conference. But this is not the only thing we have been preparing for you. We are also planning to issue the policy briefs that are looking into the solutions on the issues you brought up. Those we will be able to share with you next week. And this would be something that would be the tangible outcome of the conference that we would like to share with you as soon as possible. So this was all from us. I would like to thank my team from Asia Europe Foundation, as well as our team supporting us from the events artery, and foremost all the speakers and participants that join us, because without you joining us and contributing to this event, this would not have been such a fruitful meeting as it was. Thank you so much, everybody, and stay tuned for further updates from Asia Europe Foundation and Asia Europe Environment Forum.